And we're in the section on cultivating calm abiding, cultivating meditative concentration that leads to calm abiding. And so, we already covered, he has a whole section on choosing an object of meditation, and he gives different examples, and the benefits of each. Like, so we said, like the breath, for example, right, that's done in order for people who have too many discursive thoughts. He recommends the breath. He recommends many other different objects that you can choose from, and finally kind of settles on, for the majority of people, he gives the example of meditating on the image of a Buddha in your mind, right, not an actual statue, but a mental image. But there are many examples he gives, and he'll give more. But and last class we covered, I'm not going to summarize the whole class, but in brief, this idea that that if we're going to progress in our development of meditation, that we have to do. I was just hinting at it there during the guided meditation, that we have to balance two different things. Right? On the one hand, there has to be this mindfulness that that doesn't lose the object of meditation, right? That remembers, or that stays with, or that holds to the object of meditation. And then at the same time, right? Because one quality of calm abiding is is the abiding, right? The sort of staying with the object. And then Lama Tsongkhapa says, but also that calm abiding has this quality of clarity and vividness. Right? So it's not enough to just stay with the object. I think if you're staying with the object with a mind that's sort of in darkness or dull or something like that, that's not sufficient. But there has to be, and you won't progress in your meditation if there's not this quality of clarity. That's what he calls it. So we're cultivating both of those, and by kind of, and he gives it various analogies. He gives an analogy at one point of mindfulness being like a wild elephant tied to a tree, right? That we're keeping it connected. So we're keeping our mind, which has been wild, connected to whatever we're meditating on. So if you're meditating on the breath and you just let your mind just keep wandering away and you don't bring it back, that's not sufficient. And then he says you also need something to like guide the he says not only is there a rope, but then the elephant trainer has to have something to kind of push the elephant, kind of poke the elephant back. And that's introspection, right? So in other words, which is what we were doing, right? You're noticing your mind, right? Every now and then you're checking up on yourself. Am I still clear? Am I still with the object? Have I drifted away from the object? If you've drifted away, you got to kind of bring yourself back, right? If you're there, but your mind has kind of fallen into a kind of dark state, you have to lighten it. And so in one way, I was giving this analogy last time that, it's balance, or like, it's almost like, it's a commonly used metaphor, right? Like tuning a guitar string, right? In other words, if it's too loose, it's like not going to make good sound. But if it's too tight, it'll break, right? So in other words, in our meditation, we're trying to cultivate this kind of balance where there's enough tightness, right, that that there's this kind of alive quality, but not so much that we're tense and stressed out, because then the mind will become agitated and excited and jump away. Does that make sense? So you have to, and Lama Tsongkhapa said, in the last thing I'll mention from last time, he said in here that you can only learn this through your own experience. Does that make sense? Like he gives the instructions that you can contemplate, but then ultimately, of course, you have to go meditate and you learn from your own, like, oh wow, I made it, so you make mistakes, right? You say, like you're trying, and you realize, oh, I got too tight and my mind was jumping all over the place. All right, next time relax a little more. And then you relax a bit, then it comes a day where you start to realize, oh wow, like I'm keeping with the object a little bit now, but I'm not really having any clarity. So you increase the clarity. Then if you increase the clarity too much, your mind will get agitated again, so you kind of, and so it's a process that's experiential. Does that make sense? And that requires your own, nobody can people can explain it to you, right? But only you can watch your own mind and sort of learn how to tune it. Does that make sense? So it has to be your own process. But he's giving a lot of tools so that you have the right framework. Does that make sense? It's kind of like if somebody studies, I don't know, like music theory or something like that, right? Music theory is not the same as making music. But if somebody studied music theory, they're going to be a better, and then they're going to go play jazz, they're going to be a better jazz musician because they understand music theory, right? So it's like, so you need the theory and you need to understand it, but then you have to actually go practice also, right? You have to pick up your instrument and play. So it's like that. he's giving the sort of framework and the ways of, the tools for analyzing your mind. Then you have to actually practice it, and you'll get better at them. And that's what comes next. So he's saying, as you start, like, as you practice, so there's, right, he already said there are two tools. One is mindfulness. Mindfulness in this context means staying with the object, right? If you're being mindful of the breath, it means your mind's staying with the breath. And then this quality of introspection is where you're noticing if your mind is sinking or if it's drifting away or whatever, and you're bringing it back, you're fine-tuning it, right?
Excuse me, Lauren, what page are you on?
So we're on page 217 now.
217?
Yeah, 217, yeah. And so now he says, there are two main obstacles as you start to progress in your meditative concentration. One is excitement, right? So that'd be like the mind that's, well, he'll get into defining it. But one is excitement and the other is laxity. I'll just leave it at those terms because he's about to define them. And here, why is he defining them? Actually, he'll say this later. He's not defining them for what's the word? For philosophical reasons, really. He's defining them so that you can identify them. Does that make sense? Whereas you have to know what they are so that you can identify them in your own experience. So that's why he's going to define and describe them, and then describe what to do in relation to them. And he starts with excitement, and so I'll jump down. And again, you get this, right? He's going to describe them and define them so that then when it happens in your own mind, you can know what's going on. So he starts off by, he says, settling the characteristic of excitement. So what is excitement in this case? And again, excitement is more of a, what's the word? Here it's not being used I mean, it actually has that in common, but this isn't a general sort of excitement. Like, we're not talking about Webster's definition of excitement, which is a very general thing. We're talking about in the context of meditation, what's excitement. Does that make sense? And so he quotes the Abhidharma text, the Compendium of Knowledge. So he says, what is excitement? And this is a quote. He says, it says, "It is a very unpacified mind that pursues pleasant signs and belongs to attachment. It has the function of disrupting calm abiding." So there are three features in that definition. So I just want to go through each one and sort of analyze it, because then we're going to have to be able to analyze it in our own experience, right? So actually, the way they present it, I'll do it in the order they presented it in the commentaries. In terms of the object, the observed object of excitement, right? So so there's excitement. Its observed object is something that it finds attractive or pleasant. Now remember, from a Buddhist perspective, there is no such thing as an intrinsically attractive or pleasant object, right? Attractive or pleasant means the person finds it attractive or pleasant in that moment. Because even your own mind doesn't always find the same things attractive or pleasant, right? So for example, like there might be a person who, in one moment you find them very attractive, and then another day you can't stand them. So, the same with a certain kind of food or something, right? So whatever it would be, but the idea is that in that moment the mind gives rise to an appearance. It may be a sound, it may be a smell, it may be a mental image. Oftentimes it's a mental image. Sometimes it's a sound, right? If you're sitting and meditating, you hear something. If you hear whatever, like children playing outside or something, you may want to go outside. Whatever, so the mind gets, has an appearance of something that it finds attractive. The aspect of that mind, or the quality of that mind, is it's unpacified, right? So he says here, very unpacified, right? So it's not peaceful. And this is interesting, because we're going to get into this a lot in this next section here, which he doesn't bring up before this, and it's a mind that goes outward. Does that make sense? So it finds some object attractive, and the mind wants to go towards that object. Like one commentator said, like metal and a magnet. Does that make sense? That's kind of the experience, right? The experience is like your mind is being pulled towards that object. Of course, it's not the. What we have to understand, though, is it feels like that. It's not actually like a magnet, because the object has no magnetic pull. It's your own mind, actually, right? It's your mind that's going towards it, right? Because somebody else could look at that same object and think, oh, right? Or you another day may look at that object and say, oh. So it's not something intrinsic to the object. It's your mind that's like gravitationally pulling you towards that, and that's the experience, right? So you're sitting there, you're meditating, right? Then the mind gives rise, like let's say, you have a mental image of something, right? And then instead of the breath, if that's what you're meditating on, or the image of a Buddha, your mind gets pulled towards that, right? Pulled outward towards that. Whereas in calm abiding, the mind is turning inward, right? right? It's the opposite of calm abiding, right? Here, it's unpacified. In calm abiding, your mind is peaceful. Then also, in calm abiding, your mind is going inward and absorbing into a mental object, right? Like if it's the image of a Buddha, your mind is kind of single-pointedly absorbing inward in that. Here, your mind is wanting to go outward, towards some external thing.
How about, like, if you're attracted to that feeling, like that meditative state of, right? It's inward because nobody else feels it. It's just you. If that's what you're, wouldn't that be coming from like a ego state of, like, that feeling good sense?
You have to check for yourself. Like if you look at the definition, right, an unpacified mind that pursues, so it's going outward. Pursues means going outward or going towards pleasant signs that belong to attachment. So you have to check for yourself. I'm just like, let's say you're introspecting, right? If you're just noticing, it's two different things, right? I'll just to fine-tune this, right? If you're meditating and then you notice, oh, I'm feeling this is pleasant, right? And then you go right back to your object, whatever. Let's say you're meditating on the breath, right? And then you notice, oh, I'm feeling kind of joyful. And then you immediately go back to the breath. That wouldn't be this, right? Because your mind's not unpeaceful yet. Now, if you start to grasp at that, and you start to feel, I don't want to have any other experience, and then you start to feel, oh no, like, I don't want to lose that, you know, and you're sort of grasping at it, then your mind starts to get rougher and less peaceful. That would be this. So that could be this. But so if you just sort of notice it, but it doesn't become unpeaceful, and your mind's not, as it says, pursuing, right? So if your mind's not sort of pursuing that or sort of grasping at it, then that wouldn't be excitement. That would just be sort of noticing what is, right? Like you're noticing, oh wow, that's pleasant, okay. But then your mind stays with the object. That'd be part of introspection, actually, right? In introspection, you're noticing, okay, I'm feeling pleasant sensation, but I'm staying with the object, and it doesn't become an attachment. So with attachment, there's always this quality of, first of all, the mind gets less peaceful, and it's sort of pursuing or grasping or sort of going towards something and not wanting to lose it. So that'd be the way to check. So it could be that. But again, once you're doing that, yes, it started as an internal, but then you're sort of objectifying. There's a subject-object. You know, if you just notice the pleasant sensation and then you stay with the object, first of all, your mind's still peaceful and calm, right? But if you start to go, oh, people describe that, right? In meditation where they start to have some pleasant sensations, then they start grasping at those pleasant sensations, and then they develop a kind of subject-object dualism, as if that pleasant sensation is separate. There's me, and I want that, right? And then I'm pursuing that. And then it's funny, it was just a pleasant internal sensation, but by creating in your mind, you create this kind of subject-object quality, and then you're grasping at the object. So again, the mind's kind of going outward, as if it's going towards something. Of course, that thing doesn't exist in the external world, but in our mind, we create it as a kind of subject-object grasping, and that would be an example of
right. So the attachment or like reaching out to like that joyfulness. But then, like, if you're focusing and that's your focus, right, and that's what you think, wouldn't it be like you lose that?
Yeah, you also lose the joy, exactly.
Right? So it's just kind of like, that's a result of, you know, the mindfulness on the breath or whatever you're focusing.
Exactly. So you'd also, I mean, if you want to, if you start grasping at the pleasure of meditation, you ruin the pleasure of meditation, actually, and you lose your object. So yeah, it also disturbs your meditation, which is exactly what he's saying here. That's why it's an obstacle to calm abiding. And so the correct attitude towards such states is just to notice them, and then continue on with and then continue to be mindful of whatever your object is of meditation.
Dr. Lyon, thank you for putting it so beautifully. It almost appears this is 3 levels of self-grasping beautifully put together. As it has the words called unpacified, as you're pursuing something and getting attached to it. So you're basically, first level you look at an object, then like it, then me, mine, I.
That's correct, yeah.
Beautifully put.
It is a version of self. And self-cherishing also, yeah. Self-grasping and self-cherishing are both there. I don't like self-cherishing, self-centeredness.
So is it a we're being pulled or we're chasing?
It's actually more like we're chasing, really.
Oh, chasing.
I mean, I guess the reason why I like the image of a magnet is just that it was in a commentary. it feels a Western, I mean not a Western, like a Tibetan monk who was in the West described that way, just in the sense that that's how it feels, but it's because of our past habits. So actually we're chasing, really. Really it's our mind going towards it. The object doesn't have any ability to pull us, really. But it feels like that to us because we give so much. Actually we project onto the object and then we are drawn towards it. But the object itself doesn't have that power. And then the third quality that Lama Tsongkhapa mentions, or quotes in the thing, just notice, is that what it does, right? What it does is it functions as a disruption to calm abiding, right? So when you have this kind of excitement, you know, it's unpacified, there's a subject-object quality, there's this grasping out of attachment or desire, and the function of that is that if you're trying to meditate, it disturbs your meditation, disturbs your practice of calm abiding. And that's what he describes in the paragraph there. I'm just going to mention an aside here, a side point that he doesn't specifically mention, but I think it's worth noting. And that's this. If you think about what he's saying here, right, so excitement, he just defined it, is one of the two main obstacles to meditative calm abiding. And notice that it's defined as a mind of attachment or desire, right? It's some synonyms. There's just different translations, right? You can say attachment, you can say desire. And I often, well, other people have asked Lamas about this, and I've thought about it. If you think about it, right, the mind of excitement in this sense, in the context of meditation, is specifically focused on desire, right? It doesn't mention all the other mental afflictions, right? Like in other words, because we can also, if you're trying to meditate, occasionally you'll get distracted by jealousy, or anger, or pride, or some other, there are many different, right, resentment, and so on. There are many, many different kinds of mental afflictions that could distract you from meditation. What's interesting is that what they're saying here really is this, is, actually, and those are categories, like, if you look in the Guru Puja, the Lama Chopa, that text, there he says excitement, laxity, and I think there's another term, I forget how they translate it, but something like other distractions or something. Right? The point being, there's a recognition in Buddhist meditation texts, yes, there are other kinds of distractions that come from other mental afflictions. But if you're really practicing meditation deeply and regularly, what you'll find is the vast majority are this kind of excitement. Does that make sense? Every now and then you'll have some other, and actually he taught that, right? There are what's it called? Antidotes. If your main obstacle is anger, meditate on love. If your main obstacle is pride, meditate on what you don't know, in the vast amount of material that we're not aware of, and so on. So he already acknowledged there are other mental afflictions that sort of distract the mind and disturb your meditation. But what they say in Buddhism, right, is they categorize all of existence. I mean, sometimes it's the 6 realms, but sometimes it's the 3, right? So the 3 realms are the formless realm, the form realm, and the desire realm. And they say we're in the desire realm. And so the point being that in this realm of existence, what the Buddha noted, and what meditators have noted, is that it's almost like other mental afflictions come and go depending on, somebody does something that really hurts you and you get angry or something. And then that arises and stops. Whereas desire is almost continuous, is what if you really start introspecting and watching your mind when you're trying to meditate, you'll notice that most of the time it's jumping towards something you want. So that's why, although they do mention other ones, and they talk about the anzos to them, that they're saying as you deepen your practice, the main obstacle is going to be desire, and excitement that comes from desire. And that just comes from the, what is it, 2,500 years of experience of meditators, practicing. So I just thought that's an interesting point to notice. And so then he says, I'll read this quote here. He says, and he's using the same, the language here, he says, while the mind is tied to an object within. So he's using that same metaphor he used a couple pages earlier, where he says the mind is like a wild elephant. Have you ever seen, by the way, it's a very standard metaphor. There's a beautiful, traditional from the time of the Buddha, actually. There's this kind of drawing that's often given of a kind of path that goes like this. And it starts with a kind of a dark, wild elephant, and a monk. And at first the monk's trying to capture the elephant, and then gradually the elephant becomes more and more tame, and at the very top the monk's riding on the elephant, right? And the elephant's a metaphor for the monk's mind, right? That the monk's trying to capture the elephant and then tame it, and only in the end, right, can the elephant be serviceable and can be used to do positive things. So the elephant is a symbol of the mind in that sense. So here he's using that same metaphor. He says, while the mind is tied to an object within, right, and within is important, right? So in other words, in this sense, the mind, you've chosen an object of meditation that's inside your own experience, right? And you're tying your mindfulness is like tying the mind to that. It's like connecting the mind to that and not letting it drift away. Then he says, through the excitement of attachment to forms such as sounds, the mind is drawn without control towards those objects and becomes distracted. Right? And so what he's saying, without control, eventually we do gain control, but at the beginning, our experience is that we don't have it, right? Like, and that's true, isn't it? Like, in other words, if you start meditating, and then there's a sound, your mind jumps, right? Your mind goes towards it. Or if you start meditating and then some thought arises about something you want to do or something like that, your mind immediately, without your even, it's like suddenly you're there, right? And then you have to bring it back. And so he's noting that's that's normal, right? At the beginning of meditation, that's the normal experience, and it's because we're deeply habituated to the mind of desire, so it has a kind of power over us. And then he quotes a text that says, however much you focus on calm abiding, your mind is directed at something again and again, is drawn away by the noose of the mental afflictions without control, with the rope of attachment to objects. So here again, the idea is just this, is that we're very habituated to following our desires, to having our mind follow them. Even if, whether you're somebody who behaviorally follows them or not, if you watch your mind in meditation, actually, and many people say this, right? When they start meditating, they say, oh, I thought my mind was more peaceful before, now it's like crazy. I'm like, always like, and of course it's just, you haven't ever, it just means one hasn't watched one's mind much. As you watch your mind more, it's not getting worse, you're just noticing how your mind is. And so here, he's quoting texts that are describing the normal experience, that as you begin to meditate more, what you find is, wow, like I'm this crazy elephant that's always following desire. And that's actually the first, that's the first sign of progress in a way, is that you're noticing how your mind is. And he's saying, but if you keep tying your mind back with mindfulness to the object, it will improve. Does that make sense? It's by the nature of things, it will happen. Okay, actually, so he hasn't got, later he's going to get to what do you do with, how do you counteract excitement. Here he's just defining it. And again, you get it. The definition is a tool for introspection. Does that make sense? So now you know what he means by excitement, so when you're actually meditating, you go, oh, that was that. My mind just jumped away. Suddenly I found myself thinking for 3 minutes about some completely unrelated thing. That was excitement. Okay, I get it. Now he says, okay, so then what's laxity? Right, that's the other obstacle. And this section is going to actually be a little more complicated in terms of defining what laxity is. And he actually says this. He says a lot of texts actually don't do a good job or don't try to define laxity very clearly, and then people are confused about what it is. And this is actually considered, I mean, they're like, actually I'll just say this point, like, Lama Tsongkhapa was this incredible scholar, the teacher of the first Dalai Lama, one of the great, is all Tibetan Buddhists recognize him as one of the great masters of Tibetan history. And he has, he contributed many things to Tibetan Buddhism, in terms of clarity. And, in Tantra, they say his greatest contribution was explaining the meaning of the illusory body. And in Sutra, they say his greatest contribution was explaining, the harmony of dependent arising and emptiness. But then they say also, in the context of meditation, his description of laxity was considered a great contribution because it wasn't clear in many other texts. And he'll get into why. So this is important, is my point, and it's something that uniquely, like Lama Tsongkhapa kind of described in a particularly clear way, so that people wouldn't misunderstand it. And so he's going to get into how people have misunderstood it in order to then clarify it. And he gets a little bit technical, so I'm going to kind of describe, rather than kind of reading what he said, I'm going to just try to describe what he said, and then you can ask questions. But what he gets at here is this: he makes a point, and I'm going to use there are different translations for these terms, but I'm going to use the ones that are in this text, that this translator chose. So he draws a distinction. He says there's laxity, right? Because I already said laxity would be like the guitar string tuned too loose, right? So instead of like ding, it would be or something like that, right? It's too loose. But here he's going to differentiate between laxity and lethargy. Okay, and the reason why he's going to differentiate those is he's going to say some people, both are obstacles to meditation. But he's going to make a point. He's going to say some people mistake lethargy. They think lethargy is laxity, and then if they overcome lethargy, they think, oh, I'm doing perfect meditation, but they're not. Does that make sense? Because they've misunderstood what laxity is, thinking it's lethargy. Now you don't know what lethargy, what he means by lethargy. So we'll have to describe that. So lethargy, according to Lama Tsongkhapa's definition here, is a heaviness and an unserviceability of the body and mind. So this is, you can identify this in your own experience. You know, like, actually, I had yesterday I had like some dental work done, and they gave me, what's it called? You know, that nitrous oxide. And when I got home, I had a lot of lethargy. You know, like, I came home and I was like, oh, I don't think I can, like, you know, I want to go meditate, but I don't think I can even get off the couch. And like, I was feeling very, like my body was feeling heavy, my mind was feeling heavy and dull, right? But we can have that anytime, right? If you haven't slept well, or if you've been like working too much or something, right? You come home from work oftentimes and there could be this feeling of lethargy, right? So, and he makes a number of points. He says, first of all, it's a feeling of heaviness and unserviceability. Unserviceability in this case means you can't get it to do what you want. Whereas when you know, like there are times where a person goes like, actually this is common, right? If somebody says, I want to go to the gym, but I don't think I can get myself to go, right? That's unserviceability. Does that make sense? Or I should clean up, but I can't seem to get myself to get in that room that's supposed to be clean. That's unserviceability, right? Somehow it's like a heaviness, but it's also like what's the word? You don't have the energy, or your mind just doesn't feel flexible, it doesn't feel workable. That's unserviceability. And he's going to go on describing lethargy a little more. He says, so first of all, it's connected with delusion or ignorance. For instance, so from a Buddhist, like in Buddhist psychology, different mental afflictions are associated, some are associated with ignorance, some are associated with desire, some are associated with anger. So this kind of lethargy is connected to and is kind of an expression of ignorance, in a way. So it's not a virtuous mind, by definition. Does that make sense? And then he says, and other texts describe it, says the mind and body can feel foggy, they can feel heavy, and so on. And there's a kind of and you can't get yourself to do what you want. So first of all, you can see how meditators would say, well, obviously that's an obstacle to meditation, right? And some people, right, if they can overcome that, if they can become energetic and they can become sort of, feel light, they think, okay, I've overcome laxity. That's a mistake. That's what he's getting at. This is not laxity, this is lethargy. Does that make sense? And so if you're having that kind of heaviness or fogginess or unserviceability, to use their term, that is an obstacle to meditation. It's a mind-body obstacle, but it's not laxity. And the reason why this is important, one is, that's a non-virtuous mind. Laxity can actually be a virtuous mind. So it's also a very different state of mind. So, as I say, right, you do have to overcome lethargy to meditate, but don't mistake that. If you overcome that, don't think, oh, now I'm past the phase of laxity. Does that make sense? I mean, is that point up to that point? Up to that point, does that make sense? Okay. Then he goes on to say, okay, then what's laxity? Right? If it's not that, what is it? And Lama Tsongkhapa actually says, he makes a point in here. He says many texts don't describe it very clearly. But then he says that Kamalashila, I think it is, in the stages of meditation does describe it clearly. And so he's going to use Kamalashila's description because it's very clear. And what he says is, and I'll describe it, laxity is different. It's a mode of apprehension of a mind holding its meditation object, but in a manner that's too slack, where the object is not held clearly or tightly. So in this case, you can see it's not at all like lethargy, actually, right? If you're meditating and you have laxity, so you're sitting in meditation, and like, for example, you're meditating on the breath, right? and you're staying with the breath. Actually. So you could easily think, oh, I'm doing a good job. Like my meditation's great. But the issue here is that as the mind is slack, that's one word, right? Meaning too loose, right? And the object is not held clearly or tightly. Actually, and I was comparing this translation to the translation actually we used for Kent Rinpoche's book, The Easy Path. There we talked about, which I actually like this, rather than tight, vitality, right? So there's both a clarity and a vitality to your awareness. Does that make sense? And so, a kind of, if you're meditating and your mind lacks clarity and vitality, then there's laxity present. So do you see, first of all, you get the feeling, for if you were going to introspect in your own practice, you get the sense of how that's quite different from lethargy, right? In lethargy, there's like, the feeling be you're trying to sit like this, and your mind, your body will start going like, right? That's a sign of lethargy, right? It's like there's this feeling of heaviness. You can't, your mind, you don't even want to sit there anymore. You want to get up, or you want to go lay down. Actually, probably. So that'd be lethargy. With laxity, actually, you're staying pretty well with the object, or even quite well sometimes. But there's a lack of clarity and of vitality. Or sometimes you could say intensity and clarity. There are different ways to phrase it, but you get the feeling. I'm trying to get across a feeling by using different words, or an experience rather, by using different words. Another point here is that laxity is not a non-virtue. Like, in other words, lethargy is associated with ignorance. It's a kind of heavy, kind of ignorant, confused almost state of mind. Laxity actually is either a virtuous or a neutral state of mind. And what they mean by that is oftentimes actually people are, there's not a clarity and a vitality to your mind, but you're wanting to do something positive. Like, so you might be wanting to help somebody, but you're not totally clear, you're not vital, and your mind isn't totally crisp while you're doing it. Well, that's a virtuous thing, but it's still there's still laxity in your mind. Or somebody could be like, what's the word? There are a lot of times where a person's doing positive things, but without a kind of clear sense of clarity and vitality. So that could be virtuous, but it still has laxity to it. Sometimes laxity can also be just neutral, like if you're just sort of paying attention to something, but there's not a clarity. Like if you're paying attention to the tree, that's neutral. It's not virtuous or non-virtuous. But if you're just sort of going, oh, that's pretty, but your mind isn't very crisp or clear, again, there could be laxity there. But laxity is not a non-virtuous mind. So that's another difference between laxity and
So
lethargy.
clarity refers to features?
What's that?
Clarity refers to features or definition, or what is the reference to?
Clarity, I guess, actually, they sometimes in the text they'll describe how clarity has two aspects to it. Actually, there's if you're practicing a good version of clarity, right? If you're very clear, if you have a lot of clarity, there's both a kind of whatever you're meditating on is appearing very clearly to you, but also the subject, the mind itself, has a kind of clarity. Like they sometimes use analogies, like like sunlight, or like there's a lightness and a kind of brightness to your mind itself, also as you're doing it.
So it's well defined, kind of.
Yeah, like so if you're having clarity and you're visualizing the Buddha, right? Like let's say a person's meditating and they're sort of visualizing the Buddha, there would be some experience, first of all, that the mind itself is sort of light or sort of clear, and that then also the Buddha itself, the image of the Buddha is is appearing clearly. In that sense, there's a kind of clarity to the appearance. It's not hazy. It's not dark. It's not fuzzy or something. There's a kind of clarity both to the subject of mind and to the thing meditated upon.
And the vitality refers to?
The vitality refers to kind of a, and again, what does he use? You could say vitality, or you could say, I don't remember the word that. What's the word that Lama that this translator uses? I can't remember. Tightness or something. Yeah, there's a quality of kind of energy there, I would say. Like so, it's not like sort of it's peaceful, but there's a kind of energetic quality. I remember once last year actually when I was at the retreat in California on Mahamudra, Venerable Rene, who's a wonderful meditator and spent years in retreat, right? He was saying that up to I mean, he was, I mean, at a certain point, this is no longer necessary at a very advanced level of meditation, but he was saying, in the early phases of meditation, he even used the word tension. He said there should be a very slight, just a very slight experience of tension in the mind, like you're really paying, you know, it's like when, like if you're driving and you're really paying attention, not so much that you're going to stress yourself out, but if you're really paying close attention, like say the weather's not so good or something, and you're really kind of attentive, not so attentive that you're going to stress your mind out, because that would be excitation, but there's a kind of a little bit of a tension there, or a little bit of an energy there, or a little bit of a vitality, because, you know, you're not, you know, there's times where you're driving, like if you're driving and there's nobody around for 100 miles, and you're just sort of, you can sort of be like spaced out. It's not like that. There's a kind of energy or slight tension or a little bit of vitality. There's a quality from the side of you, of your mind, that's kind of energized, I think is one way to put it. And does that make sense that that's different than kind of spaced out, or you can still be paying attention if you're driving where there's nothing, but you're not really, you're not fully present, or you're not, there's a lack of sort of energy or tension or vitality or
Because
energy.
the object has the possibility of change. I mean, you're paying closer, basically what you said, you're paying closer attention, because it's somehow a living entity. It's a changeable entity, and that change is what?
No, I don't. In this case, no. Maybe by analogy, in that sense, doesn't fit perfectly. Because no, it's not because in this case, it's not so much because the object can change. It's because, first of all, it's according to what he's saying. One is, it's because you don't want to fall into lethargy that you're
Right.
giving that energy. But it also, sorry, say it right. It also, he's going to get into this later in this text. That energy also helps prevent. I mean, it helps you with your introspection. It helps you to be aware if you're losing. So it's actually more that you're afraid. It's more if not fear, but you're also guarding against the mind drifting away or getting too excited or too lax. So there's a kind of energy to, and also there's a kind of in the antidotes to this, it says this. There's an energy in the sense also like, let's give it the right way, like when you really see the benefits of developing calm abiding. It's like, you know, that like there's incredible benefits to this, and it's like something deeply meaningful, and it's something that has great spiritual benefit to yourself and others. So there's a kind of enthusiasm behind it, or something, a kind of like joy, you know, joyful effort or joyful enthusiasm behind your practice. And I think that's also where this energy comes from, in a sense, is this kind of like, you know, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to meditate. There's a kind of quality of like, I'll give one more. Again, I'm just trying to think of analogies, but like, you know, if you think of like, imagine like a gem cutter, right? You're a gem cutter, that's your job. And then somebody gives you like the largest, most valuable diamond ever found. Right? And like, if you make a mistake, you've just destroyed the largest, most valuable diamond ever found, and you're gonna have a bunch of little tiny diamonds that aren't gonna be worth, if you can cut this one correctly. Like, on the one hand, that person's not, when they're going to start cutting the gem, right, they're not going to want their mind so excited it's jumping away, because that's going to be a disaster. But on the other hand, they're not going to be like, relax as if this is every day's, like, oh, who cares, I'll just, you know, I'm going to work today. Right? They're going to have like a kind of an intensity to their focus because it's important what they're doing, and they feel like, wow, this is like a big deal. In a way, the meditator recognizes this is a big deal. Like, this is like my enlightenment depends upon practicing well. So there's a kind of energy behind their practicing.
So how do you, or maybe you're going to talk about this more, but how do you bridge that gap? Because I can see easily that like gravity that's there, like kind of the joyous effort, that it can like slip into excitement.
Yeah.
So how do you like keep it appropriately tempered? Or is that something you're looking at?
I mean, we'll cover that some more later, but also I'm trying to see, oh, here it is. There was a great, I'll just go, you made me think, so I'll go back. In last class, we covered Chandra Goman, who was a great Indian Buddhist saint, master. There's Lama Tsongkhapa quoted a poem from him where he said, it gets it right what you're saying. Chandra Goman's, he was also kind of a poet. He lived at the same time as Chandra Kirti. And they actually say, I'm just going on a side here, I love this story. They say that he and Chandrakirti was like one of the wisest Buddhist masters ever, great master of emptiness. And they say Chandragoman was debating with Chandrakirti. So Chandragoman thought, I can't. Chandragoman was a layperson, and he thought, how am I going to compete with Chandrakirti? So he went and prayed to Avalokiteshvara and had a vision. And Avalokiteshvara was coaching him on what to say to Chandrakirti. And Chandrakirti was going, how is this guy like keeping up with me? Like nobody can debate with me. This guy's doing really well. So then, like they say, Chandrakirti went and talked to Manjushri. And Manjushri said, oh, he's talking to Avalokiteshvara. He's talking about. So he's kind of like, I'll help you out. Don't worry, we'll get. So there's some funny story where they're both like going having their own spiritual visions to try to win the debate. But anyway, Chandragoman was a beautiful poet and great master. So he said, I'll read the lines of his poem. When I make effort, excitement arises. Exactly what you're saying. Sinking occurs whenever I abandon my effort. If by this it is hard to get even engagement, what shall I do with my agitated mind? And then he says, when I practice with effort, excitement arises. When I relax it, sinking occurs. If it's hard to find the middle between them, again, what shall I do with my agitated mind? So Lama Tsongkhapa quotes that to say, it's not easy. In other words, that finding that right balance between those two, he's pointing out, like, if Chandragoman had a hard time with it, it's not going to be easy for anybody. But you can do it if you keep practicing. So part of it is like, he's going to give these guidelines for how do you apply an antidote, and, if you notice too much of one, what do you do? If you notice too much of the other, what do you do? But what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is that, in part, is that, Lama said this once, there is no easy, quick, one time he said, there's no cheap solution or something. Like, there's no easy way to do that. It really takes practice. So there is no easy answer to that. It's only by I really think it's only by sort of making the mistake a little bit and then correcting up, and then making the mistake a little bit and correcting down, and then, that seems to be the only way one progresses. This is kind of the implication of what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying.
Well, it's helpful to know that.
Yeah, even Chandragoman.
Yeah.
So there's no easy path, that's what you're saying?
Exactly.
Tarlaran wrote that book, though.
In the book itself, though, like the title is Easy Path by Khensa Rinpoche. I edited it. But when I asked Khensa Rinpoche about that, I loved it. It's in the book, actually, but his answer was great. He said, I said, why do they call it Easy Path? Because it seems like there's no easy. And then he said, oh, this is easy. He was saying, because remember, like, the Buddha, because the Easy Path, right, is a Lam Rim text that combines Sutra and Tantra, right? So it says, if you practice this correctly, and you make like extremely great effort, you can become enlightened in one lifetime, or like 3 lifetimes, or 7 lifetimes. They said ordinarily the path takes at least 3 countless great eons, but in some cases it can take up to 40 countless great eons. One countless great eon is like 10 to the 57th power of years or something. And so he said, so compared to like 10 to the 57th powers years times 3, that's so easy. Like just a few lifetimes of extreme effort is really easy. So easy is relative, was his point. He said it's easy relative to the description of. Then he said and he was saying because Buddha Shakyamuni took 3 times of 10 times the 57, and then he said, and he was faster than most bodhisattvas. Most bodhisattvas can take 7 countless great eons and so on. So he said, compared to that, this is very easy. so easy is relative.
So how do you know whether you are being lazy or being lethargy? Is it lethargy?
Oh, lethargy?
Or being lazy? How do you know?
Oh, I see. Well, actually, if you, well, actually, it's an important point. Like, so,
That was a question mark.
he was asking, like, how do you know if you're just having lethargy or if you're being lazy? And I guess the issue would be, if you stay in a state of lethargy, of course you'll be lazy, in a way, right? Because lethargy by its nature is sort of but I think the difference would be this, is that if you notice lethargy, right, then by noticing it, you can apply antidotes to it. And that's not laziness, right? Like, so in other words, the issue really, I think an implication of what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is there are all kinds of these obstacles, right? There's excitement, there's lethargy, there's laxity, and they all do arise. So it's like you can't help that they're going to come if you don't yet have calm abiding, all these things will happen. But, so I think the key is this, is that if you recognize them and you try to apply the antidotes to them, then you're practicing effort, right? Joyous effort, if you're enthusiastic about it. And so that's not laziness. Whereas if you just sort of give into it and you say, okay, I'm feeling lethargy, I'm just going to not try, that would be laziness. So in other words, as long as you identify lethargy and you say, well, what did it cause this? That, because he gets into this. Did I eat the wrong way? Did I not sleep correctly? Did I, take the wrong substance? Like, is there medication or alcohol or something, whatever. Here's what's giving me lethargy, whatever that would be. And if you recognize, oh, okay, this is why I got lethargy, let me change my, I didn't exercise enough. There are all kinds of causes that can give lethargy. But if you recognize, like, okay, I'm going to figure out what's causing lethargy, and then I'm going to get rid of the cause of that, and then I'll get rid of the lethargy, then that's not laziness. That's making effort. But if the person just goes, oh, well, I tend to have lethargy, I won't try too hard, that's laziness. So it's different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see if I left anything out from those sections. Oh, actually, since we mentioned Easy Path, I'm going to go through something that is not in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, but Khyentse Rinpoche mentioned something that I think is useful, so I'm just going to share it, about laxity. Does that make sense? So now we went through what laxity is, and because in that text we use these two terms, clarity is used in all the texts, but there we used vitality rather than the other one. But I just want to share something. Khyentse Rinpoche actually made an interesting point and he took this from Panchen Lama, the Panchen Lama Lozen Choki Gyaltsen, the same author of the Easy Path itself and also of the Guru Puja. And there he says and this is just a tool for introspection. Does that make sense? It's like, I don't know where it came from before the Panchen Lama, but Khyentse Rinpoche he recognized it from the Panchen Lama. But he said the Panchen Lama, in order to help people introspect, differentiated 3 different levels of laxity. So I'll just describe them briefly. Again, just because they can be useful for one's own introspection. Does that make sense? So what he said was, there's subtle laxity. So with subtle laxity, the mind holds its object, right? Whatever you're meditating on, the mind stays with the object and has both clarity and vitality. But the vitality of the mind has diminished a little bit. So the vitality or the energy of the mind has begun to diminish. And he says, so that's a very subtle level of laxity that a meditator can identify, and a person could identify in the moment and give their mind more vitality, and then they continue on. Then there's middling laxity. With middling laxity, the mind holds its object, has clarity, but has no vitality. All the vitality has kind of fallen away at that point. Right? And there's a danger there, because if the person has that, then eventually the clarity is going to be lost too. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you don't capture, part of the tool, this is why the Panchen Lama is giving this, I think, is for a meditator, if they can catch, let's say, middling laxity before it becomes worse, they can just give some vitality and their meditation will continue. If they miss it, eventually they're going to lose the clarity and sort of fall into it, kind of, fall into gross laxity. So gross laxity in that text is where the mind is still holding the object but has lost both clarity and vitality, right? So it's just sort of, at that point, it's still holding the object but it has no clarity or vitality at all. So it's a kind of extreme laxity or gross laxity. So he just gives those as tools for introspection.
Question.
Yep.
So if there are these different levels of laxity, is laxity and lethargy just different points on a continuum? Like if you kind of don't correct the laxity in its different levels, then can you fall into lethargy?
You can, but actually it's interesting. Lama Tsongkhapa here is saying they're not exactly points on a continuum, and I'll say why. Like he makes a number of different points about that in a way to clarify, because it's a normal question to ask, right? On the one hand, like it's possible, of course, that if a person continued to sort of lack vitality, they could eventually develop a sense of lethargy. But a few points Lama Tsongkhapa makes. One is sometimes a person who has laxity, is still focused on virtue, though, right? They just are lacking clarity and energy about it. And then he would say, so first of all, that person, it's possible that they'll just continue to do that and not develop lethargy. There is that the person, and he makes the point somewhere in here that some meditators do that. And he says, that person doesn't necessarily develop lethargy, but over time, if they spend years and years meditating that way, they kind of develop, their mind becomes less sharp, their memory becomes less good, they can sort of become less intelligent even, if they spend years doing that. But they can sort of, but the person can actually feel quite peaceful in a way. Like, you know, if they, because the state of subtle laxity in particular is a kind of pleasant, calm experience, but it lacks a kind of energy and vitality and intelligence to it. And so some people kind of stay in a kind of subtle or middling kind of laxity state and feel very peaceful about that and enjoy it, and they don't really ever become lethargic, but they just sort of, but their mind doesn't develop insight and doesn't develop clarity and doesn't develop wisdom, actually. So they actually, the problem is, that's the problem over time, is that the person won't develop a kind of wisdom. Now, if a person, I imagine, I'm not really sure, I imagine that if a person were staying in a state of gross laxity over and over again, that might lead to a kind of sense of lethargy over time. But he says there are points where there are definitely some people who kind of stay in different levels of laxity, don't become lethargic, but just sort of, in a sense, become less clear-minded and less intelligent, really, and don't develop their wisdom. So that's the problem with, that's one of the main problems with laxity, is that it's not conducive to calm abiding, to the actual achievement of calm abiding, but it's also not conducive to developing insight. Does that kind of?
Actually, the last part holds true, because I've heard people say they get very tired after meditation.
Yeah, and so that would be again a sign that maybe they're not having enough. You know, and Lama Tsongkhapa says, do short at the beginning we should do short sessions where we can keep our vitality and clarity and mindfulness pretty good, and then don't do longer sessions. It's probably a sign the person's going too quickly into longer sessions, and then having too much either excitement or laxity, which is tiring, actually. Because really, you know, there is meditation that has these qualities of the positive qualities, right, of mindfulness and of clarity. That's energizing, actually. That's a positive experience that gives a person more energy. So the key is, I think, not to get too long of sessions done. Otherwise it becomes tiring, because your mind is sort of, you're trying to either force your mind to do something it's not able to do yet, which is tiring, and then you're sort of, you know, fighting against, either you're staying in laxity or you're fighting against too much. But if you're always fighting with excitement and for long stretches, of course that's tiring.
So is laxity caused by ignorance?
No, he says lethargy is caused by ignorance, whereas laxity is just a lack of clarity and energy. So it's not caused by ignorance. No.
So what's the condition for that?
Actually, he'll get into that a little bit. So we'll wait, and I think he'll say it. If not, come back to ask the question again. But I think Lama Tsongkhapa answers that. So.
Hey, Lauren, just like in regards to the terms that you're using, so is lethargy the same as dullness?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Some people translate lethargy as dullness. Yeah. So you could translate it different ways. And here he uses lethargy in the one paragraph, but there are other points where I think they say dullness. But yeah, it's the same translation.
So, Dr. Lauren, one fundamental difference between laxity and lethargy is that one is more of a form-related, body-related stuff, and the other one is more about trust and faith and greater motivation that guides you on the mind level.
Yeah, you could say that. And also, another difference is that, so one is, lethargy has a both body and mind quality to it, and heaviness and so on. And another is, remember, like with laxity, you're actually able to hold the object, right? In other words, with laxity, you're actually able to, you could be doing breathing meditation and be actually pretty aware of your breath, but there's just not a clarity, there's not a, and so on. So, and I want to make sure I didn't leave this out, because I think it's important. Also, I almost skipped over it. So Lama Tsongkhapa also quotes Kamala Shila, and I'll just say what he says. It's a quote from a Stages of Meditation text. You should understand that at times when the mind does not see the object clearly, like someone blind, or someone entering darkness, or someone closing his eyes, at those times there is laxity. Right? So there, he's just quoting a text that's giving a description of what is laxity, right? And I think actually, I think what it's getting at is this, is what he said. I was thinking about this a lot after reading it. I was like, well, he can't be referring to a person who's already blind. It must be, he's referring to somebody who's going blind, right? It always only makes sense then. But like, so, because he's giving three analogies, saying it's like a person, somebody used that one, it's like a person going blind, or a person entering darkness, or a person closing their eyes, right? So in other words, he's getting at an experience, right? So imagine that, right? Imagine the experience of a person who's losing their eyesight, right? Like before they could see everything very crisply and clearly, and now things start appearing hazy, or parts are missing, or like you can't really see it. You know, like you're going like this, but you can't really see it, right? Or he says, or a person entering darkness, right? Like if you're someplace unfamiliar and you enter a room and there's not enough light, right? It's like you don't want to trip, you know, so you're kind of looking around, but you can't really see, right? But the point is that he's describing there the lack of clarity, right? The experience of a lack of clarity is what he's getting at in that analogy. So it's like things, you know, things are hazy, or things are fuzzy, or things are, they lack the crispness of clarity.
It's like you know the object is there,
Yeah.
but you can't see it clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know it's there.
Yeah, that's what he's getting at, right? So, because you haven't lost the object, right? So you know the object's there, but you can't, it doesn't appear clearly to your mind. And so he's using an analogy of vision to get at what's the experience like in the mind of laxity. So there's a kind of darkness, almost, of the mind. Not necessarily literal darkness, but a kind of, you know, we can say that, like, oh, my mind was darkened or something. Like, it's like a
Crowds.
what's that?
Crowds.
Yeah, or clouds. Yeah, you can't see it clearly, or foggy.
Almost like a comprehension, like where you're like just not quite making the connection on something, like you're able to listen, but you're not able to engage in the dialogue.
Yeah, that could be another analogy, right? I mean, he's using vision, but you're using you're using, actually, essentially you're doing the same kind of thing he's doing, but with auditory in that sense, right? Where like it's, you know, you can't quite hear. Like there'll be another analogy, but again, remember in this case it's the mind, of course. But yeah, you could use the analogy of hearing also, right? Like, you know, oh yeah, I know somebody's saying something, but I can't quite make it out, he's using vision. You can see it, but you can't really see it clearly, or. But either one is a fair analogy, but for what happens in the mind when you're in laxity, because laxity is a state of mind, or a quality of mind. And then he very briefly, he's going to do much more on this. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but he briefly says, in the great text it says that in order to eliminate laxity, you should uplift the mind, meditating on a joyful object such as a Buddha image or light. And therefore you prevent the object's lack of clarity, which is like darkness having fallen on the mind. And then, and the decline of the mind's mode of apprehension, right? So he's saying, I mean, again, I'm not going to go into the antidotes too much here because he gives a huge list in a few pages, but which I don't forget to say. But here he's saying, right? It's like he's just describing more. He's saying this laxity is kind of like the mind in darkness, or then he's giving a more technical thing. He's saying the mode of apprehension, right? So that's what you're saying. It's like, you know, you're apprehending whatever it is, but the mode of apprehension no longer has clarity and vitality to it. And then he says, then you need both a clear object and tightness. I'm calling that vitality, but tight, here the translator is saying tightness. Either one, but you're getting they're both trying to get a feeling, right? The mind has a kind of energy, a kind of tightness, a kind of vitality to it, in its mode of apprehension. And when the mind is apprehending something without that clarity and that tightness or that vitality or that energy, that's laxity. And then he says, I'll just read it because it's what I was saying earlier. That he says, excitement is easy to recognize. Right? Well, actually, it is pretty easy to recognize, isn't it? Because if you're having a mind of desire and then your mind is chasing after it, you're no longer with your object. Right? And he says, but laxity is not clearly defined in many of the great texts, which is why it's difficult to understand. Yet it's essential, because this is a major ground for mistaking one's meditative stabilization to be faultless. Therefore, you should investigate and identify it well with mental subtlety based on your experience in accordance with what you just explained from stages of meditation, Kama Shila. Right, so he's saying here, it's easy, one is it's not always clearly defined in text, as I was mentioning, but the other is, he says, right, it's a major ground for mistaking one's meditation to be faultless. So he's saying there are a lot, he's making this point, and this is what I was saying, is one of Lama Tsongkhapa's many contributions to Tibetan tradition, is he's saying there were many meditators actually who did like retreats or practiced meditation for a long time, who stayed in this state of a little bit of laxity, found it pleasant, and just never progressed. And they didn't succeed then in developing calm abiding, and therefore they didn't succeed in developing special insight. And it was all because they made this mistake of not being able to identify laxity in their own experience and therefore staying stuck. So he's saying, so please don't make that mistake. Does that make sense? So he's compassionately guiding us by pointing that out. Okay. Then he says, it's not I can't tell if this is Lama Tsongkhapa. I sometimes think this is his sense of humor. It's not enough merely to have an understanding of what laxity and excitement are. Rather, you need to generate introspection that knows exactly whether or not laxity and excitement are arising during your meditation. So he's saying, if you memorize the definitions, but you don't actually apply it to your own practice, that's really pretty useless. I think that is kind of his sense of humor coming through. From having read a lot of Lama Tsongkhapa's writing, he's kind of like that. Right, so you need these definitions or understanding of what they are to identify them. But he's saying if you leave it merely as intellectual knowledge and you don't put it into your own actual sitting sessions, it's not going to do you any good. Then he says, and in fact, not only do you need the ability to generate introspection that identifies laxity and excitement as soon as they arise, due to the gradual generation of powerful introspection, you also need introspection that recognizes them when they are about to arise. And so here he's getting at a point that I just want to raise, and he's going to explain more about this, I think, a bit. But what he's saying is, actually, I'm going to put it in my own words for a second. At the beginning, right, when you first are practicing meditation, actually what happens is that you recognize excitement after it arose, usually well after, right? Like, so you might be sitting there and then going like, oh wow, like I was meditating on, I thought, like I was supposed to be meditating on this, but then for the last 3 minutes I've been thinking about that, right? Well, that's not when it arises, that's well after it arose, right? But that's better than no introspection, isn't it? And then he's saying that eventually you'll come to the point where you can, you'll recognize them as soon as they arise. Does that make sense? And then he says, and then eventually, as you get better than that, you'll be able to identify them as they're about to arise. Right? You'll be able to see your mind heading in that direction. Right? But he's saying, in order to do that, you need what he calls powerful introspection. Right? Well, nobody starts off with powerful introspection. Introspection is a skill, right? And you're only going to develop it through practice. Right? So part of the point here is this: first of all, you have to do it in your own experience. Second point is, so in other words, if we start off, I sometimes, one time His Holiness Dalai Lama was saying this about anger. He was saying, like for somebody who's been an extremely angry person who would get angry for like 3 days at a time, right? If they get it down to 1 day at a time, that's progress. They only stayed angry for 24 hours. And then if they can get it to like 3 hours, wow, that's like huge progress, right? And then, and then eventually, so in other words, with this, right? If you sat down for 10 minutes and you were distracted for 8 of the 10 minutes, well, of course, you're not going to suddenly catch distraction before it even arises, right? So your introspection is going to become a skill you're going to become better at. And there's a predictable process, is what he's kind of implying here, right? First, you'll notice things after they arose and after so you'll notice, for example, laxity after you've been sitting in a kind of state of laxity for a while. You'll notice excitement after you've gotten totally distracted for a while by some desire. He's saying eventually, if you keep practicing introspection, you're eventually going to reach a point where you'll notice these things as soon as they arise. That's a very significant point of progress. Right? That means your introspection has started to become powerful. And he says, and as you continue on and on with that, eventually you're going to get so good at it that you're going to see the mind just when it begins to move towards one of those states, and you'll be able to cut it off. he says, and that's when you have extremely, there's implication, right? Then your introspect is extremely powerful, and you'll become a very good meditator in that way. Does that make sense? So it's a predictable process, and there's no use in getting frustrated with ourselves for not having better introspect to begin with. Of course we don't. We haven't practiced it. It's like any skill. You have to start where you are, and then you develop it over time.
What are you noticing to demonstrate lack of clarity? What is it that you're, introspection, what is it that you're seeing to demonstrate lack of clarity?
According to Kamala Shila, it would be what you're seeing is that there are two different points Lama Tsongkhapa. One is you're seeing that your mode of apprehension of the object feels like there's a darkness, feels like there's a lack of seeing clearly, feels like there's a lack of crispness or clarity or detail or, so if you were meditating, think of if you're meditating on the Buddha, right?
So the lines of definition are blurry, kind of like that.
If you have clarity, well actually maybe an easier way to do it is if you have clarity, what's it like, right? If you imagine that somebody who has great vitality and clarity in their image of the Buddha, for them, again, there's going to be like what? It's going to be made of light, right? Because the Buddha, when we do this visualization, first of all, the Buddha is made of light, right? So they would have this experience of a brilliant, radiant Buddha, and if they want to sort of move their mind around, there's like, they can see the eyes very clearly, they can see the nose, they can see like the nostrils, they can see, the fingernails very clearly, and it's all brilliant and made of light, and they can see the appropriate colors even, right? Like, so the eye color, the whites of the eyes and so on, right? There's a kind of quality for that person of light and also a clear appearance in a way, right? So then,
straightforward, well defined.
and well defined. Whereas for the person who has this other thing, right, it's like, it'd be like, imagine that it's more like looking at, if you came in here and didn't turn on any lights and the shades were down and you looked at that statue, you'd be like, oh yeah, there's a Buddha there. If you've been here before and like it wasn't pitch darkness, there was a little bit of light coming through the shades or something, you could say, oh, I see a Buddha statue there, but you wouldn't be able to see right? It would be like in darkness. That's what Kamala Shila is saying, right? So it would be like, it's there, but it's not appearing clearly, and it's not light. Also, it's probably an indication. There's a kind of, that's why he says it's a kind of darkness. There's not that quality of brilliance or of.
Thank you.
Hey, Lauren, but laxity arises after we've held the object of meditation. If we haven't done that, laxity from what? We're talking in respect to the object of meditation,
Mhm.
correct?
Yep.
So you have to hold the object of meditation clear in your mind, or steady and all that. But if you haven't done that, then laxity, because we're talking about laxity in respect of holding the object.
That's right. Yeah. So like on the one hand, yeah, you're right. Like in other words, if you're part of what you're implying, which is true, right, is if we're at the very beginning where our mind is, and this is why actually in the oral instructions, actually Lama Tsongkhapa says this in here somewhere, but also in the oral instruction lineage it says this. At the very beginning, we should emphasize going for stability, right? Because there's a recognition that at the very beginning, as you're implying, excitement is so predominant, right, that the mind jumps away. You hold the object, the mind jumps away. You hold the object, the mind jumps away. You hold the object, the mind jumps away. And so at the beginning, what they say is don't push too much for clarity. Start off by trying to develop some stability. Right? And part of that is just recognition at the very beginning. First of all, there's this tendency of the mind to have desire and to jump away so much that if you push too much at the beginning for clarity, your mind's already jumping away, it's just going to jump away more, right? It's like turning higher a guitar string that's already too high. It's just going to not work. So what they say is, at the very beginning, focus on stability, try to decrease the excitation of the mind, and hold the object. But then once you're able to hold the object even for a little bit of time, right, you're still trying to mainly stop excitation. But they say at that point, once you can hold the object for some periods of time, then you have to start trying to develop a little bit of clarity, right? But they say like Khenpo Rinpoche says, don't push too hard too soon for clarity, or you'll just end up back in excitation too quickly. So he's saying at the beginning, yeah, emphasize stability, emphasize decreasing the mind of excitation, but then like what you have to do, I think experientially, right, is as you start to make a little bit of progress, then you start to experiment with, okay, but do I have any clarity or any vitality? Let me just add a little bit more, and then you see, oh, have I gotten too distracted? Okay, wait, I went too, it's too soon. But then, as soon as you start developing more stability, you gradually and gently, and really, I think the implication is, you very gently and very slowly start using introspection to guard against laxity, and then as you make more progress, you have to work more and more again to fine-tune the laxity issue. But you're right, at the beginning, if you try too much to fight against laxity, you're just not going to be able to stay with the object at all, and that's not useful. But even that example with the breath, right? We can, like, if you're able to stay with the breath for, a number of breaths, then you can start to notice, well, is there a clarity in my awareness of the breath? Or is there a kind of, does it feel too lax? So you can start to check up, but again, if it's your first meditation session, you don't worry about that. If it's your 10th, you probably don't worry about it. But if you're doing it regularly, you can start to notice. Yeah, and that's part of the, because we're learning also introspection. Does that make sense? So you start to check, well, is there vitality there? Is there clarity or not? And it takes a while even to be able to tell, right? Like, especially if we're not that good at holding the object yet. But pretty early we start to at least practice introspection about these different issues in order to understand our own mind and how it works.
Dr. Lawton, I had a question on not on the object, holding the object, but on the breath. So, coming back to Jeff's question on before it arises, how do you capture that? And so, one of the experience I wanted to share, and if it's correct, is that your breathing becomes, there's a cycle to it. Like, you can feel it, in a period of just maintaining and then seizing. And then after a while you feel like, oh, it's kind of not at the same flow. I mean, there's a change in that sequence. And then that's a very good way of actually understanding the introspection part. Oh, the flow is now slow, it becomes slower and slower and slower, but then at some point you feel like, oh, it's not the same, it's not consistent. So that would be an example of introspection. Would you say that?
It's an interesting question. Well, because I guess one question is, are you noticing in that case either excitation getting away from the breath or laxity in relation to the breath, or are you more just noticing the quality of the breathing itself?
So basically you have a feel of a sense of your breathing, like it's equal in terms of moving in and out.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you see like there's a change in that slight change, that like the slightest that you can feel about. And
So I think that's clarity, actually. I think when you have clarity, like I noticed that, I'll give an example like what you're saying, like what they say is as you get more and more clarity, right, in relation to, say, the breath, if that's your object, yeah, you can notice like all these details, right? I remember the first time somebody pointed out to me, like, or in meditation, I was like, well, I was noticing the out-breath and the in-breath, but I never noticed the transition between. Yeah. And then I was like, oh wow, there wasn't enough clarity yet, or enough mindfulness also to stay that level of detail. But as your mind gets more clear, yeah, then you can notice.
So
they say you can notice like all those
clarity
things.
would be the characteristics of that breathing.
Yeah, that you're really seeing them, perceiving them, apprehending them. Maybe that's the term they use. Clearly, right? Where you even notice, as you're describing, is the out-breath stronger or the in-breath stronger? Is it stronger through one nostril or the other nostril? There's a kind of clarity that really sees every detail of the thing.
So the introspection part would come in because what I was trying to refer there was when you have that clarity, the introspection comes naturally in the sense that now you're aware of, there's a change in that cycle. Would that be introspection?
In the context in which Lama Tsongkhapa is using it here, I think introspection is more about, in this case, introspection is more about introspecting about the quality of the subject of mind that's apprehending the breath in that case. So in this case, introspection would not be paying attention to the breath itself, but to the mind apprehending the breath. So you'd be noticing that mind that's noticing those things, is it noticing them with clarity? Or is it noticing them with vitality? Or is it having some subtle excitation that's moving towards jumping away from the breath? So the introspection in this case, I mean, again, because introspection have different meanings, but in the case that, in the way Lama Tsongkhapa is using it, it's an awareness of the subjective mind. And is that mind excited, or is it abiding? Is it mindful? Is it getting distracted? Is it having laxity, or is it clear? Is it having laxity, or is it having vitality, and so on? So it's more about the subject. That specific meaning of introspection, because in general introspection can mean many things, like what you're describing. But in this context, it's noticing the subjective mind and checking if it's having these obstacles or not.
But if you're looking at the clarity of the Buddha object, that's not the subject of the mind, that is the subject of the object that you're, those are not the same.
No, but I guess in that case, what, at least my understanding is again, with the clarity, he says in here at some point, there are two aspects to clarity. Does the mind itself have a kind of clear, is one experiencing the mind itself as sort of, as this kind of clarity, having a clarity? But if that's happening, then the object will also appear. So in a way, I guess it's like, and I mean his analogy of darkness, I think, is like that. In other words, actually it's interesting, right? Like if a person is losing, think of it that way. If a person is like losing, I was recently talking to somebody who was like that. They were having vision problems, and it was interesting. What they were saying was like, oh, I was like, they might say, I woke up in the morning, I was looking around my house, and everything appeared different, and it wasn't. They were like, it wasn't. It all looked blurry, and there was like gaps, and there was things weren't looking normal. And what's interesting is that they weren't thinking, well, my house has changed. There's a recognition something's going on with my eyes. I'm not seeing it. So it's like that. In other words, if you're not seeing the object clearly, you're recognizing something's going on with. In this case, it's not your eyes; it's your mind. But so you would look at how you're apprehending the object, but it's in order to get a sense: is my mind clear or not? So I think it's like that with the eye. So when the person saw things that were blurry, they weren't thinking, oh, the external world is blurry, but it was like that was the way they could tell their eyes were having a problem. So I think it'd be the same thing. It's like, how's the Buddha appearing to my mind? And if the Buddha's appearing very crisply and radiant versus like in darkness, that's my way of telling how my mind is. I think that's the way you would do it. Does that make sense?
So you're really evaluating the mind based on your evaluation of the object.
Yeah. I think so. A few more minutes. Okay. Well, then again, so he's saying, so he's making this point, right, that eventually, if you get this ability with very strong introspection, where you can catch these obstacles before they arise, that's really wonderful. And then again, he says, as long as this kind of introspection has not arisen, although you decide that from this point till the point where there is flawless, basically what he's saying is this. I won't read it because it's translated in a way that's hard to say out loud, or it's hard to get across. What he's saying is, if you haven't developed introspection, right, and then you go meditate and you say, I haven't noticed any laxity or excitement, I must have perfect meditation. He's like, that's not correct. That's not the sign of perfect meditation. That's just a sign you haven't developed any introspection yet. So don't make the mistake of thinking because you have no interest. Be like, well, Lama Tsongkhapa said having no laxity and no excitation is a sign of perfect meditation. And I haven't noticed any, I sat down and I was thinking about my, peanut butter sandwich, and then I was thinking about this, but I didn't have any laxity or excitation, so I'm fine.
Ignorance
Perfect
is
meditation.
perfection.
What's that?
I said ignorance is perfection.
Yeah, exactly. Ignorance is not
Jeff, there
perfect.
is nothing wrong to think I'm enlightened. You can take that.
But you really do get a sense of Lama Tsongkhapa's kind of he has a kind of subtle sense of humor, but he comes out over and over like that. So he's saying, don't think I never saw any laxity excitement at all, so it must be great. And he says, because in order to realize laxity and excitement, you need introspection, right? You need this ability to be aware of your own subjective mind. Therefore, if if the introspection that cannot fail to recognize laxity and excitement has not yet arisen, you may meditate for a long while, even for years, with subtle laxity and excitement, without ever sensing they've occurred, right? And he's saying, what he's getting at is like, actually, this is why, actually, they say, if you haven't studied these topics, it's not dangerous that here we're all in Washington, D.C. and like that, but, sometimes there are people like who want to go off and do like long retreats or something, on their own. And the tradition says, if you haven't studied enough to know what these things are, you just waste a really lot of time, right? If you went off and did like some very extensive retreat somewhere and something, and you didn't know about this, he's saying you could actually waste your time because you could just like be habituating yourself to mental obstacles, and then, not that you wouldn't get anything out of it, but it wouldn't be so beneficial. So he's saying, that's why the tradition says study, you have to study and then meditate.
So can like excitement come without laxity?
Say again?
Can you develop excitement without laxity?
Without laxity?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Actually, in some ways, excitement is the, so that you could have excitement where there's no laxity at all, but that's a problem, right? Like, so, for example, if a person is trying to meditate on their breath, but then they could have extremely great clarity and energy, thinking about something they're attached to, right? Like they could have incredible clarity. Wow, so they're trying to watch their breath, and then suddenly the mind has this incredibly clear appearance of pizza or whatever, or a party or something, and like there's great energy there, and it's like totally clear, but that's not meditation, right? Because you're supposed to be meditating on the breath, but you have this clear appearance, so there's no laxity at all. The mind is excited and it's clear and it's energetic, but it's on the wrong object. So that's not.
Like a rock band, the rock stars. I wouldn't call them, they have laxity. They have totally excitement, totally into it.
Yes, but that would be excitation.
That would be a good example.
Does that make sense?
No, I don't get it.
Like so, because you're saying, can you have excitation but not laxity?
Yeah, because I think laxity comes before excitation, right?
Oh no! Sometimes excitation can just come by itself.
Yeah.
So let's say you're trying to meditate on your breath, right? And then you suddenly think very clearly of, you did pizza, right? And the pizza seems really clear, you can almost smell the smell of it, and you see what's it called, whatever's on it, pepperoni or mushrooms or peppers or whatever that is, and the cheese and all that, right? Your mind is very clear, there's no laxity, but you're totally distracted by excitation at that time. So there was no laxity. It was only excitation of your mind jumping to something you want, desire.
So you could have laxity and excitement at the same time? Or would it be more like on a scale that
Yeah.
if you tip one way, then one is over here, and if you adjust over, would it be like a scale and you're trying to make it balanced on both sides?
Yeah, the way it's described is more like you're trying to find a balance between the two, right? Because if you think about, I'm trying to think if there.
And then if you have lethargy, you're not even on the scale.
Because
Yeah, exactly.
because it seems that laxity pulls excitement. It sounds like not to have excitement, like laxity pulls excitement, not for excitement to happen.
Usually when there's laxity, actually, the way he describes it, the mind is staying with the object, actually. It's like if you're meditating on the breath and you have laxity, there's no clarity, or let's say you have gross, so there's no clarity and there's no vitality, but your mind is still just with the breath. But you can imagine, the person's they're staying with their breath, but their mind is kind of, isn't clear, it isn't energetic, but their mind is still staying with the breath, so there's not excitement. They're not excited, they're just sort of staying there, but their mind is not jumping to something else with desire. So with laxity, your mind can stay with the object, actually.
But that could lead to excitement. If there's not very much if there's not much concentration on the object or tightness of the object, then the mind would be more free to go off to follow some other thought. Which would be
It might or might not. Yeah, I think the point is it might or might not, because here he's saying sometimes people spend years with subtle laxity. So in other words, a person might just stay with laxity and not drift away, or it's true, right? They could get bored and then jump away to some other thing. So either is possible.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have laxity to go to excitement.
So what does the, like, if you get lost, like, let's say you have an object, let's say the mind is the object of concentration, right? Then you get like distracted. So where does the focus go?
So like, well, in that case, what do you get distracted by?
I mean, a condition, some stuff comes up, and then you get distracted. First, like, some stereo stuff happens, then you get distracted, and then, like, and then when you're distracted, you go somewhere. I mean, your mind is like zoomed out somewhere. I mean,
Right.
you know, it gets like zoomed out somewhere, or you get excited, right?
Mhm.
Two things, right? You get like either your mind is like zoomed out, or
Mhm.
you're excited. Because so what causes that?
I think excitement is what causes that.
So what causes excitement?
The habit of having desire, like our habituation, our habit of being, of following desire.
And then what causes the accident?
What causes that is ignorance, grasping at a truly existent self.
And then lethargy also is caused by ignorance, right?
Yep.
So both are caused by ignorance.
Yeah, actually, if you think about it, everything in samsara is caused by ignorance, actually. You're right.
Yeah.
I think Fidel wants to debate.
No, I'm curious because I'm not getting it.
You get like.
I'm not getting it. I don't know why, but that particular, like, if I'm not getting like laxity, I don't know why I'm not getting it, but it's kind of.
You understand. It seems like you understand what lethargy is. That you know.
I know
like
that
you're
one.
tired.
And excitement. I know excitement, but like because I'm wondering, like, excited to be excited, you have to be confused. You might have to be confused first, and what confuses the mind to be.
Yeah, in that case, it's just, I mean, you're right that, but not confused in the normal sense of the word.
Yeah, not
Like,
confused. No.
just confused in the sense of having ignorance.
Yes, but ignorance is deeper in the mind.
Yeah.
But what about on the surface, like?
Yeah, on the surface, it's just desire, I think. Like, there is underlying desire, you're right, is always ignorance,
Yeah.
according to Buddhist psychology. But on the surface of the mind, there isn't confusion necessarily. It could just be pure desire. Like, whereas a person doesn't have to be confused to think, I mean, on a conventional sense, right? If you're saying, like, you know, I don't know, like, if you're saying, like, I really want pizza, that's not confused. You know what I want.
Yeah, but if you say that laxity is caused by you can be positive, that means that his intention is not must be positive.
Yeah, they said laxity can be neutral or positive, actually.
Yeah, so the intention beyond that is positive. Then.
Yeah, because if you think about laxity, like, again, I'll use the example where Jeff was asking a question about. So imagine somebody's visualizing the Buddha, right? So you think, okay, I want to meditate. I'm going to visualize the Buddha. That's the example, right? So the person starts visualizing the Buddha, and they're visualizing the Buddha, but it's not clear, right? It's appearing to them as like a statue in the dark, right? Not clear, not light, not vital, right? It's virtuous because they sat down saying, I want to visualize the Buddha, I want to meditate, I want to progress on the path, right? So that's virtuous motivation. And then they are visualizing the Buddha, so there's something virtuous about that. But it's lacking clarity. You know, it's like a darkness image, right? It's like in the dark. It's not like clear, it's not light, it's not. So it's a virtuous effort they're making, and that what they're doing is actually a virtuous thing, but it's not developing calm abiding because there's this quality of lacking clarity or darkness to their mind. It doesn't have that clarity or that vitality or that light or that energy. So they're not progressing towards calm abiding. They have a kind of laxity to their visualization, but it's still a virtuous thing they're doing. They're not doing something negative, right? They sat down to meditate. They're thinking of the Buddha. That's a virtuous thing to be doing. They have a good motivation, but they're lacking a kind of clarity.
So, zero excitement, right? So what causes zero excitement? Ignorance.
Yeah, ignorance and the habit of desire.
Zero.
So the laxity is caused by the ignorance of not recognizing that this isn't the end accomplishment yet of feeling like, okay, I'm meditating on the Buddha, this is it. So there's an ignorance there of not recognizing the lack of clarity, and so they're not working,
Yeah, not applying the
not
antidotes.
applying the antidotes and trying to get that balance.
Yeah, because there's a, yeah, I mean, if you think, we'll get into this later, but there's a whole progression in developing calm abiding. And one of the early obstacles they talk about is the obstacle of not applying the antidotes. And that's, so that would be that. It would be that they're falling into the mistake of not applying the antidote, or one, you know, not they, we, you know, whoever it is falling into the mistake of not applying the antidotes when the antidotes need to be applied.
But Lauren,
Can excitement be non-virtuous?
Yes, yeah, of course, right, yeah, like excitement can definitely be non-virtuous, right? 'Cause
So it
like,
can be non-virtuous, virtuous, and neutral.
that's an interesting
It can't
question.
be virtuous, though.
What's that?
It can't be virtuous. Excitement is not virtuous.
It says here.
Somewhere in there it says it.
I don't think it can be virtuous. Because it's always
No,
associated
it's
with
just
pride.
excitement,
I mean, if
right?
you're excited,
Excitement is
I-
always.
I-
if you're
and
excited to
pride.
become a Buddha, though, I mean, they're not excited. What's the other?
Actually, I'll ask a good question. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure of the answer though. The reason why I'm not sure is, like, usually excitement, because it's a mind of attachment, so it's not, in general, it would be non-virtuous, but I'm just not sure. I have a question. Like, actually, well, Gabe, I'll debate with you.
Yeah,
What if the person is meditating, right? And then, like, they, let's say you were here meditating, right? 'Cause you came early one day in September, and then you heard Kensei Rinpoche laughing outside because he's teaching in September, right? And you got excited, and you got distracted from your meditation by an excitation, thinking, "Oh, I want to jump up and go see Kensei Rinpoche." Like, would that'd be excitation because it's a mind of desire on your part, right? You're desiring to go see him. You think, "Oh, I want to go out and offer him a kata." Let's say let's say you're meditating on your breath. You're sitting here, right? You hear Kensei Rinpoche coming up the stairs, and you immediately think, "Oh, I want to go offer Kensei Rinpoche kata. I'm excited to see him." And there's a mind of desire wishing to see your teacher and offer him a kata. Like, so it's definitely a mind of desire. It's definitely obstructing your calm abiding.
Right.
But the desire is to offer, in that case, is to offer Kensei Rinpoche kata. Would that be, I don't know, I'm just sort of trying to figure it out. What would that be? What's that? No, what would that be? You have an answer?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that isn't that somewhat attachment to your satisfaction of seeing Kensei Rinpoche?
Yeah, no, so I'm saying that is an attachment.
So
I mean,
that's
that's a
an
desire.
attachment, because it's really your actions are to satisfy that desire, not to further your practice, not to benefit the Lama, not to benefit anything other than satisfy your desire.
Well, and one point I'll make, which is interesting, is okay. Actually, he says it here. I think I found the answer. Hold on one second. Oh no, that's about laxity. I guess one point I'll make is this: it's an interesting point, right? Because somewhere he addresses this point, like, desire by its very nature is a mental affliction. Right? That's in Buddhist psychology, it's classified as a mental affliction. But at the same time, right, like, not all desires are negative karma. And here's an example. Like, the desire to take a good rebirth, right, in a future life, is a desire, and it's self-centered. It's a self-centered desire, but it's virtuous.
Is it always self-centered? How could that always be self-centered?
No, it's not always, but I'm saying if I were to think, I want to take a good rebirth for me, because I don't want to suffer in a future life. Like, it's different if it's a bodhisattva thing, I want to take that to benefit others. I'm saying if I were to think, yeah, I don't like pain, and I don't like misery, so I want to have a good future rebirth, and I don't want to take rebirth in hell. I'm just giving an extreme example, right? So I'm going to go practice morality, right? And my motivation for practicing morality is the desire to have a good future rebirth for myself, so I'm not miserable and in pain. That's an afflictive emotion, because it's desire, but it's virtuous. It's a virtue, right?
But it's still rooted in ignorance.
Yeah.
Because it's the ignorance of the self.
Right.
So,
But all of our good karmas, actually all the good karma that most of us has ever created is rooted in
rooted in
ignorance.
ignorance. Not,
But it's still, so it's a mental affliction, but it's still virtuous.
it's tainted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they call it impure, but still good karma. Yeah.
I would argue that excitement, it can be virtuous as well, because I think
Okay.
sometimes I experience too much excitement at like I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna come to every single class in the center, but like I just get too excited to a point where I can't sustain it, and then it's like I have this really good motivation, but it's too much, too excited, and then the same in my meditation practice, just like too much of like this end goal rather than like lessening that excitement and just being with what it is at this moment and what I'm able to actually accomplish. And it's not sustainable. Even when I have like a really good motivation, it gets way too out of control of my excitement, and then it crashes and
Maybe it has this really thin area of virtue, like either laxity or excitement, but it's easy to like fall out of it, quickly.
Yeah, I mean, clearly most excitement is non-virtuous, right? That's obvious. But I actually think, but I do think, and actually, and one of the, actually, yeah, no, that is true. And one of the commentaries that even said that, actually, as I think about it. One Lama who was commenting on this said, a person could be practicing, like he gives an example of a monk. Like a monk could be practicing meditation where they're supposed to be focusing on visualization, and then the thought could arise of desire, actually. Oh, I want to get up and do prostrations, or oh, I want to go do my other studies or something. And he said that would be a mind of desire. That would be, so it's a mental affliction, and it'll always, through the power of it, you'll always take rebirth in samsara, but it can still be a virtuous.
And it's interrupting the goal, but it's still virtuous.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's actually an obstacle to your
Right.
current goal, but it's still virtuous. So that's possible.
because otherwise then what Chandra Goman said, like how it's this like balance of you're going up to excitement, down to laxity, but then you would just be going from non-virtuous to virtuous, and somewhere maybe getting the right thing happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there has to be some like veil of words both.
Yeah, so it is possible to have a mind that's, what's the word called? That's excited by a and that's also why sometimes they say that, like, if you're trying to cultivate calm abiding, even a virtuous desire is an obstacle to your current goal. So that's clear.
I think it's on page 218, Laura. If you go to near the top under bullet number 1, some people lump together laxity and dullness. So go to the last paragraph in that. It says in the compendium of knowledge. I think that's what is going in there.
Yeah, right. So it could be, that's right.
So you can have distraction, as explained there. It could be virtuous, so not necessarily afflicted.
Right. Yeah, so it's a mental affliction, but it can be a virtuous.
Right.
It can still
so
be a
it's
virtuous.
a distraction to your
But His
meditation.
Holiness clearly says that. I mean,
Yeah.
one time somebody asked him a question, and he said, desires, without desires, how people are going to get enlightened? You've got to have a desire to be enlightened.
Yeah, so the key here, though, is that if it's distracting you, if your mind is, it's an interesting point, right? It could be a virtue in the sense that it'll lead to a good rebirth or a good result, but if your mind is getting agitated and it's distracting you from your object of meditation, it's an obstacle to your meditation practice. And at that time, that's the point, is that even a virtuous distraction, or even excitement towards a virtuous object that you're desirous of, is an obstacle to be abandoned in that moment, because you're practicing meditation. At some other time, then, if you want to go do prostrations, and the example that one Lama gave, great. But at that time, you need to, notice it. You would be practicing introspection and noticing, oh, this is a mind of excitation that's distracting me from object of meditation. You come back to your object of meditation. One time I went to Canterbury. One time I went to Canterbury. I was doing like a visualization practice, and then I was doing the visualization practice, and I got distracted, And I do different visualization practices sometimes during the day, and then all of a sudden I was like doing a different visualization. I was like, oh, wait a second, I was supposed to do this. And he was just laughing. He was like, yeah, that's not good at all. He's like, he laughed, he was like, yeah, that's not helpful at all. Like, which is an example of this, right? It was like, what I went to was another positive practice, but it was like, but you're supposed to be doing this practice that's completely wrong, you know. So yeah, I can think of my own experience of that, right?
So is there also zero laxity?
What's that?
Zero laxity.
Yeah, subtle laxity, yeah.
So it's not lethargy. Lethargy is not the gross one.
Oh, subtle laxity. Subtle laxity. Yeah,
Yeah.
subtle laxity would be like there was. Remember we said there was subtle, middling, and gross laxity from the
Oh,
Panchen
yeah.
Lama. He said that. Yeah, so subtle laxity would be where there is clarity and vitality, but the vitality has diminished a little bit.
In the middle, what about the middle?
The middle is where you're holding the object and there is clarity, but there's no vitality. And the gross is there's no vitality or laxity. I mean, or clarity rather. Sorry, no vitality or clarity. Yeah. So this comes from the first Panchen Lama, Losing Choki Gyaltsen. He actually wrote many books, but one of them was called I like the title, so I'll just say it. It was The Melody of Laughter. His name was Lobsang Choki Gyaltsen, so it was The Melody of Laughter of Losang's teachings, responses to questions. So he was responding to questions with a kind of melody of laughter. So what he said was, subtle laxity is where the mind is still holding the object. Makes sense, right? Like if you're visualizing the Buddha, it's holding the object. And there is clarity and vitality, but the vitality has begun to diminish. So you're kind of losing your vitality. Middling laxity is where the mind is holding the object, and there's still clarity, but all the vitality is gone. And then gross laxity is the mind is still holding the object, but there's no clarity or vitality. And that's the example where it's like in darkness, right? I was saying like if you were looking at the Buddha statue in the dark, you can't see it. It's like, that'd be that. So there's gross laxity is like being in darkness. I think my view is that the other two are leading towards that, right? In other words, if you're in subtle laxity, there's still clarity, so you're still seeing the Buddha clearly. But if a person had very, very strong introspection, they'd be able to see, oh, my mind's starting to get a little bit lax. It's starting to lose its energy. If I don't increase that, eventually I'm going to end up in darkness. You know, so it's a tool for somebody who's very
So
good at introspection.
vitality is like effort to focus, effort to concentrate.
Here he says another translation is tightness. So it's it's like holding the object tightly. You know, it's like really kind of having a strong grip on the object, you could say. You know, maybe that's another way of putting it. Having a really firm grip. You know, so the Buddha is not just sort of there, but it's kind of like you're like vitally, there's an energy to how you're holding because remember it's your mind, right? So it's like your mind is holding the object with a kind of energy or with a kind of grasp. Your mind's really grasping it. We often say that, don't we? Say, oh, I really grasped that, versus I just sort of had a vague sense of it. It's not vague. There's a kind of tightness to your grasp, or there's an energy to your holding of the object. It's just it's words to try to describe what the mind is like, so it's a little tricky, but something like that.
There's no lethargy.
Yeah, there's definitely no lethargy, for sure. Well, it's actually 12:30, so we should stop. So we'll leave off there, and we'll come back. You know, there's a lot more about... In the next section, by the way, I'll just tell you, he goes into really wonderful detail about, especially with laxity. I had like a whole page, a list of... He gives so many techniques to counter laxity. And actually, when we do that one, what I want to do is actually we'll do them in here, some of them. We'll actually practice them, because they're interesting techniques. Supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In this snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.